From the Toronto Star, I'm Rudgy Mudler, and this matters. The bubble is going to burst. What's the list price? And how much will it actually go for? How can they spend over $1 million and still do a teardown? If you've lived in the city for any amount of time, you've probably heard these things and know that owning real estate here has been an upward escalator, basically your retirement plan, or something that feels completely out of reach. In some ways, it's talked about like sports, and for the first time in a long while, the game might be changing. This pandemic is causing people to rethink their lives and move out of the big city. This urban exodus is being fueled by a number of things, like the recent acceptance of true remote working, but also the idea that it might just not be worth it to live here. We're going to hear one perspective on that. Then, we'll be joined by a real estate agent who will give his perspective on the market now. But first, we are joined by Samir Khan. He is a Toronto resident who works remotely for an international NGO. He's here to talk about his family's decision to move out of the city. He is also a dear friend of mine, so I want to profusely thank him for coming on to talk about the several factors in making this tough choice. Hey, buddy. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Regs. How's it going? Sorry, am I allowed to call you Regs?
Of course
Roger.
Of course you are. Okay, listen. So you're here because we keep hearing about people who are leaving the big city, in part due to this pandemic, but you and I have been talking about your decision. Let's start with the fact that this is not a heat-of-the-moment decision, but it may have been accelerated. When did you start thinking about this, and what are the factors leading to it?
So I've been here for about 14 years, and I think it really came to the fore maybe when we started having a family. My wife and I had our first son about 2.5 years ago, and we always wanted to, if everything worked out, have a second. And I think when we started crunching some numbers, we have a small kind of 2-bedroom house in Toronto right now. We started crunching some numbers about what it costs to get a third bedroom in a house or buy a house with a precious third bedroom. What would that look like? And then we had all these spreadsheets and everything, and then we added the daycare line item. Then we just kind of looked at it, and I think the decision ultimately was sort of made. And then I think it was just a matter of timing, because we knew that this was going to be a reality at some point, but we just didn't really know when it would be a reality. And so here we are.
So you told me about a month ago that you were putting up your place and then you were going to start looking for a house. For our audience, where is that and why?
So we're moving just north of Montreal to a kind of small community in the Laurentians called Morin Heights. It's where my wife's family is based. It's sort of in the region where she grew up. And my parents are also near Ottawa. I mean, that was another big factor in wanting to move, especially when you have the families being close to our parents. So yeah, we'd been keeping our eyes out for it for about a year, and then it all just came about recently. The other thing is that we discovered that she was pregnant with our second child, just 2 weeks after she was laid off. So it's kind of like for her, looking for a job during a pandemic while pregnant is just really tough.
So you put your house up in August?
Yeah.
How did that go?
I mean, it was a bit of a mad dash. And of course, until we actually sold, it's just a very nerve-wracking sort of experience. You have to clear out your house. You have to do all the little fixes you need to make sure that your house looks really well and presents really well. And then you really don't know until the day that you sell your house whether it was going to be worth it at all. And in fact, when we actually took a little visit to our families, so we got out of our house and, our agent recorded something like 40 or 45 people visited the house over the week because they don't do open houses anymore. So it was just a ton of people were going to see it. And then, the night of, there were only 4 offers. And that's all we knew just before those offers started getting sent. So, that moment, those hours were extremely nerve-wracking. And then you start looking at the offers, and then you look at what people are willing to pay for a house in this market and what they can manage. And, we did really well, and we're very happy about that. But it is just a very insane experience to go through it and then to look at where you come out at the other end if you're able to leave.
Listen, real estate is a sport in this city, and obviously I have looked up how you did. You did well, and you found a new place. Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, it's still not entirely closed because everything works very differently in Quebec. If you buy or sell a house in Ontario, it's you basically commit to everything with very little protection for yourself. Whereas in Toronto, it's you can put conditions on the house. And so we're in that process of...
Not really in this market, though.
No. I mean, we had conditions. We did a water test. We tested the septic system. This is at a kind of a rural ish community near a small town. We got a 4-bedroom house. It's been recently renovated. It looks really nice. It has a big yard. There's like they call it the aerobic corridor, which is like a walking trail nearby. It's about an hour outside of Montreal. I don't really want to gloat too much because I feel somewhat guilty about it. Again, like this seems like it will be a really nice option for us for at least the next little while. And the only reason we could really afford it is because we bought real estate at one point in Toronto and sold during this market, right?
Listen, I've seen your place. I will gloat for you. I'm already jealous. It looks amazing. I can't wait to come visit. But now here's the thing. You feel, I think, conflicted about leaving. Why?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, it'll be different listening to your podcast, not being a resident of Toronto. And it'll be...
We're still there, buddy. Come on.
I know you're still there, but then, it's just different. There's a bit of Toronto pride, right? Like, Toronto's a big city with lots of things going on in it. And we have great friends, and there's real draws to being in a city where people are doing, like, all sorts of different things, Like, there's different industries here. It attracts people from all over the world here, who have a lot to bring. So it's a very exciting city to live in, but like it just feels like these dynamics or these forces and frankly the lack of meaningful policy responses are just kind of whittling away at all of these strengths, Like so many wonderful Toronto events, like this kind of sense of cohesion that you can get when you like go to a big concert at City Hall or at Harbourfront or like when the Raptors won or anything like that. That's all like kind of intangible and really good. Like I spent a lot of time in the UK when I was doing my master's, and Toronto has small businesses run by actual small business people. If you go to downtown London, it's like a lot of those places are owned by chain shops. That's something that's really great about Toronto.
Well, you mentioned policy responses. What do you think could be done?
Daycare. Daycare is one. And then the second thing is Toronto just needs to build more housing that is suitable for the people that live here. Like how many decades have we spent building condos, 1-bedroom condos? And how many people are trying to start a family and not able to find the type of housing that meets their needs? I used to work with people who were raising families in all of those 1-bedroom condos that they didn't even own. They were just renting because that's the best that they could do. It seems to me that there needs to be some sort of like regulation of the development process to make sure that housing meets the needs of people. I mean, we just need more houses for the amount of people that are coming in. And we don't need more housing that just kind of serves investor markets or Airbnb markets, That's not good enough.
I think one of the things that you said to me was when your wife had her job and things were going well, you started looking and you kind of felt it was sort of unfair that you couldn't upgrade in the city. Is that fair to say?
Well, okay, yeah, I do think it's unfair. And the thing I think about is just like, if it's hard enough for people like us who were at one point doing relatively well, I just like shudder to think what it's like for people, making less, of which there are a lot of people who make a lot less than us. Like, I just really don't know how this city really works for them. And I just think things like, why does the city not have enough daycare spaces to make it more affordable to people? Why do we, for the sake of having a marginally lower tax rate, not invest in things that people actually really need in the city so that the economy does better? Those are things that kind of really bug me. And then when you look at things like certain line items in the city's budget that seem to have no attempt to even rein in any costs, I think that that's reflective of something that is kind of deeply broken about the way the city works. And I don't really know how it's going to change. It's kind of funny. There's like 3 reactions about people. Like people are really jealous and they're really excited and people are like, go, 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 you can live the dream. And then there are a few people that have kind of said to me, why don't you stay and fight for the city that you want? And I don't really have a good answer for that. I'm the type of guy who writes the local city councilor and writes local MPPs and signs petitions. And, I have friends who organize tenants and all that type of stuff. And it's just, I just kind of don't see much efficacy for all of that effort. I don't see that much responsiveness on the part of local leadership beyond, the few city councilors that seem to have a grip on some of these issues. So those are things that make me angry.
We'll be right back. I'm going to play devil's advocate with you. There was an editor I used to have who used to say, affordable housing is housing that you can afford. It may be an infuriating system, but it seems to me that it's worked out for you. You had a small house, you lived there for 5 years, you worked out, you did well on it, and now you are moving somewhere else where your costs are more in control and you're going to be closer to family. Like win-win all around.
Hey, I don't argue with how it's worked out for me. I think the success of Toronto is deeply important to the rest of the country. So it works out for me. That's great. What about other people who didn't have the options that I have? What happens then? I know people through the other parents that my kid goes to daycare with who have just very different circumstances, who are hardworking, who are doing the best that they can, and just are not going to be able to leverage all of these wonderful things because of just very different circumstances. And I think it's great to point out, the Toronto Life thing about how things work for certain people. But if it's not working for a lot of people, I think we're going to see the evidence of that if we're not already seeing it already in the city, So I also think, the other thing that it says the housing market works because people can afford it. I really wonder how people are affording to do it, because one thing that has not happened is that wages have not kept up with what I think is like the real cost of living. Some people seem to do well and others don't. And, if the economy is working properly, I think the gains would be more evenly distributed. It doesn't feel like they are right now. And I think that that's a huge problem.
Last question, my friend. You were out there. Was it busy? Were there other people buying? Like I said, this seems to be an anecdotal thing. It is your anecdote that you are sharing with us now. Are you seeing other people who you think are thinking of decamping this city for similar reasons?
Yep. I have a few good friends who are in exactly the same boat, who want to have a second child and have options to move to Quebec, where daycare is cheaper. And they compare the higher taxes they'll pay, different sort of adjustments they'll need to make for living in a different province. And they're like, absolutely, this is what makes sense for us. These are also people who can work remotely, and that's a certain type of worker. Lots of people can't do that. So it's not as much of an option. But I think for people who are lucky enough to have kind of networks that are outside Toronto, this is something that they can do. Like in Morin Heights, the community that we're living, there are actually a lot of people seemingly moving from Montreal to that area for similar sort of dynamics, right? So yeah, I guess someone will have to look at statistics and see what kind of effect this is having on the city or how many people are actually doing it. But anecdotally, yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people really think about.
Well, sir, I'm going to be very sorry to see you gone, but obviously we will Zoom like we are right now and keep in touch. And I really, really, really want to thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thanks, Raju.
Samir Khan is a Toronto resident who has decided to move out of the city. Now that we've heard a personal take on this decision, let's take a look at the numbers. We are now joined by John Basalis. He is the president for Realosophy, a brokerage that takes a data-driven approach to the market. He's here to talk a little bit about urban exodus and what people leaving could mean for the GTA market and beyond. It's John's second time on This Matters, so I want to say how much we appreciate this and warmly welcome him back. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so when I reached out to you about this whole leaving Toronto thing and the urban exodus, I said that it felt anecdotal. But it seems it's an anecdote that everybody has some friend that's doing it. I talked to you, and to you, it's not anecdotal at all. What are the numbers saying about this?
Yeah, so definitely when we look at the numbers in the GTA, the areas in the GTA that have the highest growth in sales, when we look at, say, June to August of this year, I say June because that's really when buyers jump back into the market after the slowdown from COVID. April and May was quite slow. So over the past 3 months, areas like Simcoe and Dufferin, which are quite far, the real outer suburbs of the GTA, have the highest increase in sales. Simcoe's up over 60% year over year. Dufferin's up over 50%. And when we look at the city of Toronto, sales are up only 10% year over year. So we're seeing this big shift into the outer suburbs. And, it's worth noting that this isn't just a GTA trend. I'd say this is something that we are seeing about all across North America, from cities like New York, San Francisco. So a lot of these really big urban centers are seeing big shifts in where people want to live and leaving sort of these urban centers for these more suburban markets.
Okay, but here's the weird thing. Prices and transactions in Toronto are going up. How can both of these things be true? Is this just pent-up demand and lower inventory in the city, or is it too early to ask this question whether these people leaving are going to have an effect on prices and availability here?
So there's a few things, happening with sales and prices in this market. So When we compare the market, we typically compare it on a year-over-year basis. So we'll say something like, how many sales did we have in August of this year compared to last year? Now, one of the problems and why some of the statistics are a bit misleading right now is because of COVID, the market basically froze for 2 months. So when people jumped back into the market in June and July, it was like a 2-month delayed spring market this year. And spring's typically the busiest month. So we're comparing almost like a delayed spring market in the GTA this year compared to a summer market last year. So the numbers look very inflated when we compare them year over year. Now, with respect to the impact it's having on prices and the trends in the GTA, I mean, it is worth noting that this isn't like a hollowing out of the city. It's not like people are completely leaving their urban homes and moving to the suburbs and to the farms. You know, we're seeing an increase. The percentage increase in areas like Simcoe were very high because Simcoe typically doesn't have a lot of sales. So, you know, if we look at the numbers, the city of Toronto had just under 1,000 more homes sell over the past 3 months compared to last year. Simcoe had about 1,500 more homes sell this year versus last year. But the percentages are very different because Simcoe doesn't have a lot of sales to begin with. So again, these are, you know, kind of small percentage of people who are making these shifts, but it's definitely a big trend. And it is an important one that's going to kind of impact both the balance of the demand for, I'd say, condos more downtown rather than houses, and the demand for low-rise homes in these really outer suburbs.
I want to talk about condos because we just wrote a story about how they look to be the ones that are starting to feel more of the price pressure. But the thing is, the issue here is it's not just where they are, it's the fact of this pandemic. You're living in really cramped quarters. Is this the thing that potentially could bring about, you know, the long rumored condo crash in the city?
Well, I mean, there's definitely some kind of risks ahead for the condo market. And there are some challenges both on the demand side and the supply side. So on the demand side, you're right, we're seeing a decline in people wanting to live in some of these really, really dense towers, partly from health risks, you know, not wanting to be in crowded elevators, or, you know, when they are sort of distancing and managing the number of people in the elevators, it takes you a lot longer to go up and down a 30 or 40-story building when you only allow 2 or 3 people in an elevator at once. But the bigger factor, I think, is that, you know, one of the big pluses of living downtown is, of course, the lifestyle and the nightlife for a lot of people. You know, it's the restaurant, it's the clubs, it's the live music venues, it's the dynamism of living downtown. And since COVID, that has either all stopped or been significantly pulled back. So one of the big attractive features of living in the core is no longer there. And I do think that's one of the factors that's impacting the condo market right now. And I think condos downtown are a lot slower than houses, partly for these reasons. But again, I think it's a matter of time where once the fear of COVID's behind us, I do think, you know, we're going to see recent grads want to be in the core again. I don't think recent grads are going to be wanting to kind of move out to the outer suburbs forever. I think this is kind of go along with the risks of COVID. And as that winds down, I think we're going to start to see more demand in the condo market in the future.
It's funny. I talked about the anecdotes because this is where I'm seeing this. I have one friend who's moving to Quebec, and one of the big things that he's countering is because of the cheap cost of daycare there. I know another woman who works for Twitter, that's a company that's gone completely remote, and she's moving to Halifax, which is where her family is and was never an option before this. On my street, there have been 2 houses. Both have recently gone for sale and sold, but they've been sold to renters who live in the area who wanted to stay there. So to me, what I'm seeing is, one, the first 2 people, it's not just this pandemic, it's a bunch of life factors that has opened up the options. The other 2, I absolutely do think it's the pent-up demand type of thing. It's impossible to judge real estate looking at right around you. But I guess my question to you is, do you think people are leaving, you know, to go further out, or are they trying to stay within the GTA at the very least?
You know, it's a good question. I think it's a combination of both. And I think when we look at the market right now, there was pent-up demand because the market was quite insane in January and February of this year. But what's happening right now is it is actually the COVID has created new demand, you know, and this is the demand that you're talking about. All of these people who 4 months ago or 5 months ago had no intention of moving anywhere, and all of a sudden they want to leave their condos or leave their homes. And you're 100% right. We're seeing some people do that, moving to the outer suburbs of the GTA, but some people making very big life decisions and moving to other parts of the country, moving to cottages permanently. And again, I guess this is all based on this assumption, or this, maybe in some cases, the reality that they can work from home permanently and don't need to be in the office, or don't need to be in the office that often. And, you know, I will add that I think in some cases, at least with the clients that we see, it's not always a knee-jerk, irrational move. I mean, in many cases, many of the families that we've talked to who are in these positions and making these moves were planning or hoping to do this at some point in the future. And COVID has just really accelerated that because they've made it easier for, say, one of the two people to work from home, whereas the other partner was always able to work from home. So I think that's kind of the big difference right now. It's just kind of accelerated people's longer term plans and kind of made them a little bit more immediate.
This whole urban exodus, I guess, reshuffling of the deck, what do you see as the potential long-term implications of this on the market here?
I think the big unknown is going to be what's going on with the condo market. And like I said, I think there's two things. The condo market, I think, is important. I do think that this behavioral preference to move out of the city, in particular as it relates to condos, will kind of die down as the risks of COVID unwind and kind of aren't impacting the market and our health very much, because I think people will want to move downtown. But I think the big question is going to be, will the jobs be there tomorrow? We're seeing a lot of big companies tighten up their footprints downtown, wanting to sublease their space. And one of the big drivers of condos downtown was that that's where the jobs were. So, even if those jobs still exist, if they go virtual, well, is a 500 square foot condo big enough to both live and work out of? And I think that's going to be one of the risks in the condo market when we have a lot of really small units. The one positive side is that, if we continue to see more demand in these really, really outer suburbs, well, these are areas where it might be a little bit easier to build and build more quickly. And these are pockets of potential supply that the GTA hasn't really focused on very much because there weren't as much demand out in those real outer suburbs. So this could potentially take some of the pressure off of the traditional GTA's housing market as people move to some of these really outer suburban regions.
All right, John, let's play a little bit of make-believe. Let's imagine I actually had some money. What should I do with it? I have a house in Toronto. I love it. I love this city. I could probably sell it and do pretty well, but let's just imagine I wanted to actually stay here and I had a little bit of cash. Should I buy a cottage? Should I wait for the condo market? And should I buy one of those and then hold on? What do you think?
I think it's personal preference and lifestyle specific. I mean, again, I live and work downtown. I'm not selling my home anytime soon. I think the people who are looking at moving to cottages, I think really, need to do more homework. I don't know how many of them have lived in a cottage during the winter or have been in those types of environments or realize what internet access is like, availability in these cottage country. So I think people who are making these big decisions probably should do more research. But again, I think as a first-time buyer, I think you just need to do what suits your lifestyle. So if it is buying a home downtown, I mean, you want to buy something that you can afford long-term. If you're buying a condo and your plan is only to be there for 2 or 3 years, I mean, I wouldn't buy a condo because, you want something that you're going to stay in for at least 5+ years. So if that small, starter condo is not your long-term plan, then yeah, I would probably not be buying it right now.
John, this has been fantastic for us. I want to thank you for your time and your knowledge.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
John Pasalis is the president of Relosophy. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Rajin Budler, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.